My bet is that you keep falling out of momentum. You're in this weird cycle where 1 minute you're absolutely flying. You're building, creating, you've got momentum, and everything feels like it's clicking into place. And then the next minute, it's gone. Like someone flipped a switch, and you suddenly can't figure out why you're even doing this anymore. You feel uninspired, stuck, like you're wandering around, lost in the woods with no idea which direction you're supposed to be heading in. And there's likely this thing that's happening inside of you, this internal conflict, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. So naturally, you start questioning everything. Your ability to actually pull this off, your discipline, whether you've got what it takes, whether you're even committed enough to the thing you've built in the first place. But here's what's actually happening underneath all of that. You've lost sight of why you're in the game in the first place. And there's a pattern here that I want to walk you through because I had a conversation with a client this week that made this crystal clear. I was talking to a client of mine earlier this week, and this conversation blew my mind because of how fast everything clicked into place for him. So this guy runs an agency. He is a smart young guy. He's been in the game for a number of years now. He's very competent and he knows what he's doing. But he's been dealing with this internal conflict for probably about a year now, and he couldn't figure out what was causing it. He just knew deep down that something was at war with himself. One part of him was pulling in one direction and another part pulling somewhere completely different. And it had been going on for so long that he'd basically just accepted that it was part of who he was. He just constantly had this internal tension. Now, I noticed this because he was contradicting himself on one of our calls. So I started to dig into it. I'm asking him questions like, what do you actually want? What does success look like to you as an individual? If we were to strip everything else away, what is it that actually matters most? And as a result, here's what started to come out. There's a part of him that knows exactly what he wants, and it's freedom. The freedom to travel. He wants location independence. The ability to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, wherever in the world that he is. Now, we've been able to establish that this is his core value. That's what lights him up. That's the whole reason he started building this business in the first place. But then there's this other part of him that believes he needs to have this big office with a team in order to be successful. Like in his mind, if you're running a real agency, you need to have a physical space. You need the employees. You need the whole setup that everyone in his industry associates with a proper business. And obviously, these two things are completely at odds with each other. They can't both exist at the same time. Not in the short term, at least. So I kept pushing on this because I could tell that there was something underneath it. I was asking him why he actually wanted the office and the team, what he felt like they were actually going to give him. And after enough questions, here's what we uncovered. The only reason he wanted a big office with a team was because that's what he had seen online. That is literally it. He'd been watching other agency owners, seeing their setups, their team photos, their office tours, their staff nights out, and all that stuff that gets posted on social media. And somewhere along the way, without even realizing it was happening, he'd absorbed this idea that having an office and a team was the success criteria for a successful agency. He never questioned it. He never stopped to ask himself if that's what he actually wanted. He just assumed that's what success looked like. So, as a result, that became the goal he was working towards. But this is where it all starts to fall apart. Achieving that goal would completely destroy his core value. It would put him totally out of alignment with the thing that he had built this business for in the first place. The moment he gets that office and that team, he loses the freedom that he cares so deeply about. He'd be tied to the location, managing the people. He'd have overheads and responsibilities. And all of these things would chain him to a specific place. So in essence, he's building the exact opposite of what he actually wants. And look, in one conversation, and I'm literally talking one conversation, as soon as we identified this and we laid it out in front of him, everything shifted. He could see it immediately. It was like a light bulb going off. For at least the last 12 months, he'd been playing someone else's game. And that was what was causing all of the friction and all of the conflict, and ultimately led to him losing momentum. But the moment he recognized this, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He had this new sense of meaning, this new direction, this feeling of aliveness that hadn't been there for months. And the momentum came flooding back that following week. Not because he changed who he was or he developed better habits or any of that stuff, but because he had finally got the clarity again of what he was actually building towards. Now, here's why this matters to you and why I'm actually telling you this story in the first place. This exact same thing is likely happening to you right now, whether you realize it or not. If you've lost momentum, you've likely lost sight of why you're actually in the game. You've adopted someone else's success criteria without even being aware that you did it. And now you're playing to the rules you never chose in the first place. And that internal conflict that you're feeling, that sense that something is not quite right, but you can't put your finger on what it is. It isn't you versus you. It's you versus expectations that aren't even yours. So here's how this happens. You see somebody absolutely crushing it online with a certain business model, or you see somebody building a team and scaling, or you see someone hitting these massive revenue milestones and posting about it, because we all know that social media is just a highlight reel. So somewhere in your brain, usually without you even noticing, you file that away as This is fundamentally what success looks like. You don't question it. You don't stop to ask yourself if that actually aligns to what you want and who you are. You just assume that this is the path that you need to take. That's the game everyone else is playing, so that must be the game that you should be playing too. So you start building towards it. You start making decisions based on this version of success that you've absorbed from watching other people, but it doesn't align with what you actually want. Doesn't align with your values, with the life you're trying to create, with the reason you started your business in the first place. That is when momentum dies, because you're trying to build something that doesn't fundamentally fit who you are and what you care about. You're uninspired because you're building someone else's vision, not yours. You feel stuck because you've strayed so far away from your own path that you don't even know how to get back to it anymore. And I am saying this from first-hand experience because I've also done this myself. That is the only reason I know about this. And the challenge here is that if you've got an ADHD type brain, you're likely even more vulnerable to this because our brains are wired differently when it comes to how you make decisions and what signals you pay attention to. There's this tendency to look to external cues to guide your decisions, and external validation almost becomes the compass that you're navigating by. What's everyone else doing? What does success look like out there in the world? What are the markers that signal that we've made it, that we're on the right track, that we're doing it properly? And because of this wiring, ADHD type entrepreneurs are far more susceptible to adopting other people's success markers as if they were our own. You see it online, you assume it's the path, you make it your goal, and you don't even realize you're doing it. This is how your brain processes information and ultimately makes sense of the world. You're looking for patterns. You're looking for proof that something works. You're looking for external confirmation that you're heading in the right direction. But here's the problem with constantly scanning external signals like this. When you're always looking outward for validation and direction, you lose connection with your own internal compass. You stop asking yourself what you actually want. You stop checking in with your own values, your own priorities, your own definition of what a good life looks like. Instead, you just follow the pattern you see working for other people, assuming that if it works for them, it must be the right path for me too. And this is exactly what happened to my client with the agency. He saw the pattern everywhere he looked. Successful agency equals office plus team. That's what all the big players have. So he adopted it without question. He never stopped to ask himself whether that's actually what he wanted or whether it aligned with his core values. He just assumed that that's how you play the game if you want to win. And that's why so many ADHD type entrepreneurs keep losing momentum over and over and over again. And ultimately, as I see so many people do all the time, they end up building a business to a certain point, become completely dissatisfied with it, burn it down, and then start another one. And yes, I may be talking about myself right now too. But this happens because we're likely playing someone else's game. We're following someone else's rules, building towards someone else's definition of success. And then we're wondering why it doesn't feel right, why you can't stay motivated, and why this feeling of momentum keeps evading you. So how do you actually fix this? Well, this is exactly why the Clarity Compass is the very first exercise I give to my clients when they join. Before we build anything, before we create systems, before we talk about strategy or tactics or any frameworks that I use, we get crystal fucking clear on what you actually want. Because you can't build sustainable momentum on someone else's foundations. It will always feel forced. It will always feel like you're pushing water uphill. Because fundamentally, it isn't yours. And here's the underlying philosophy behind the Clarity Compass. And this is really important for you to understand. Your business should be the facilitator for your life, not the other way around. You build a business to serve the life that you want. You don't reconfigure and structure your life around a business someone else told you to create, or the model someone else said was right. And the Clarity Compass works by identifying 3 specific gaps: the values gap, the business gap, and the identity gap. So first we get clear on your personal values. And no, we're not talking about business values, but your personal values. What actually matters to you when you strip away all of the noise, all of the shoulds, and all of the expectations? What does your vision for your own life look like? Not just your business, but your actual life. And then we look at where those values are being compromised right now by the way you're currently operating. Are you actually building and living in alignment with these values? Or are you making decisions that go against them? Because if your core values are being compromised, if you're building something that contradicts what you actually care about, that is the first thing we need to fix before anything else. And this is exactly what was happening with my client that I spoke to you about a moment ago. His core value was freedom. Freedom to move. Freedom to choose. Freedom to live life on his terms. But he was building towards something that would completely destroy that freedom. So as a result, his values were compromised. And this killed his momentum, which made this internal conflict inevitable. The second gap is the business gap. So we look at how you're currently running your business versus how you actually want to be running your business, how you want it to look, how you want it to feel. And then we look at the gap between these two states. What needs to change in your operations, your systems, your delivery, your marketing, your positioning, and all of that? Where are you ultimately stuck doing things the way that you think you're supposed to be doing them? instead of the way that actually works for you, your brain, and what aligns with where you want to go. The third gap is the identity gap. So who do you need to be to run that business and to live that life that you've just defined? And who are you currently? Then we can assess what the gap is between those two versions of yourself. How are you currently acting, showing up, making decisions versus how you need to act, show up, and make decisions to become that person, to live that life and build that business. And then the work that I do with my clients essentially becomes centered around systematically bridging that gap. And this is the exact process that gave my client that instant clarity I mentioned earlier. We were able to identify the values gap. We saw exactly where he was compromised and why. And in that one conversation, he knew precisely what it was that he needed to change and what he was therefore wanting to move forward with. He could see the path clearly. And it wasn't because I gave him some magic solution or even told him what he needed to do, but because he could finally see clearly what he was building towards and whether it actually aligned with what he wanted deeper at his core. Now look, when these three gaps start closing, when you start moving towards alignment instead of constantly drifting away from it, summit shifts. Meaning creates momentum, not productivity hacks or these convoluted morning routines. Meaning when you're aligned to your path, not someone else's path that you copied without realizing. When you're building towards your definition of success, not their definition that you absorbed from scrolling social media. When you're playing your game by your rules, pursuing outcomes that actually matter to you. That is when momentum comes, and it comes naturally, without force, because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not at war with your expectations that you never fucking chose in the first place. You're not trying to force yourself into a mold that doesn't fit and wondering, why do I feel so exhausted? You are committing to your own game. You're committing to stop playing to someone else's rules, and you create your own definition of what success actually looks like for you. And then you feel alive again. That sense of direction returns. A sense of purpose returns. And you enter a state of momentum naturally. Not because you white-knuckled your way through with discipline and willpower, but because you're finally building towards something that actually aligns with who you are, how your brain operates, and what you actually want. And this is what happened the moment my client saw the gap. Almost at a click of a finger, momentum returned. And it's because he stopped trying to be someone else. He stopped measuring his success against criteria that had nothing to do with his actual goals or values. And that internal tension that had been present for so many months dissolved on the spot. So if you're feeling that internal conflict right now, if you keep losing momentum for no obvious reason that you can actually put your finger on, if you're feeling uninspired or stuck or lost in the woods without a clear direction forward, I want you to understand something. It's not a you problem. It's likely a clarity problem. You've lost sight of why you're in the game. You've adopted someone else's success criteria without realizing it, and you're playing to the rules you never actually chose. Your brain is screaming at you that something's wrong, that something doesn't fit, that something needs to change. The path back to momentum starts with you getting clear on what you actually want, not what you think you should want, not what success looks like for other people in your industry, but what you want, your values, your vision, your game, your rules. Please, for the love of God, stop playing someone else's game.